Around 3,500 years ago, the Indo-Europeans lived on the steppes of the Caucasus. They were a simple tribal people who farmed and raised animals. These ancient people believed that the sacred, in the form of devas, permeated everything around them, including human speech. Apart from the meaning of words, it was the very sound of the words was even divine. They had no temples, but they would gather in the open air to offer sacrifices. All the elements of the original creation, according to their mythology, would be present: earth, water, fire, sky, plant, bull, and man. The priest would begin the chanting, which would summon the demons. Since the sound of these inspired syllables was itself a god, as the song filled the air and entered their consciousness, the congregation felt surrounded by and infused with divinity. Eventually the sacrifice would be made, and the people would join in the communal feast. Well, these simple people would become the spiritual ancestors of many of the world's major religions. The scholar Karen Armstrong provides this description of their early practices, and she tells how one group of these Indo-European descendants, the Vedas, who would later live in India, were influenced by this idea of sacred sounds. For the Vedas, Om was the sacred syllable. It was the primordial reality because everything else derived from it. Now for the Hebrews, sound or speech or song could never be divine. They were, of course, strict monotheists. But song was still an important part of the experience of the sacred, functioning something like an icon which would point us and connect us to the power of God. And I'm reminded of how this tradition of the creative power of song has lasted in the Christian tradition, even into the 20th century. J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, both of them, their fantasy worlds are sung into being. The song itself becomes part of the sacred movement in creation. As God moves towards us, we respond, and what results is a new creation. And this is what we see in Psalm 98 and its three sections, which together describe God's movement, our response, and what results. The introductory Sing to the Lord a New Song identifies a new orientation. According to Walter Brueggemann, a new song must be sung for a new orientation. He adds that this is a new God who has not been known in this way for these people until now. And so there must be new music to match. Well, these verses remind us of why it's important for the church to continue and compose and learn new hymns. As God is still speaking and we are still learning, there are new truths about the divine that we encounter, that we learn, that we must then incorporate into our worship and sing new songs. In particular, over the last few decades, we've learned to embrace feminine aspects of God, to write hymn lyrics that are more inclusive of various races, orientations, and abilities, and to overcome the church's militaristic and violent past. All of these movements of the church compel us to sing new songs. Well, verses 1 to 3 of the psalm hold up the great themes of God's covenant with Israel: righteousness, faithfulness, steadfast love, a new beginning. These are the components of God's victory over the forces of chaos and sin. They are, in effect, God's movement toward us, on behalf of us, seeking to form a new relationship with us. They also function as ideals, or to borrow a term from the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, lures for feeling. The actions of God on behalf of us reveal to us possibilities for the future. These possibilities stir our feelings. They enter our dreams. They excite our passions for us to then actualize those possibilities. They are possibilities for something new, a new beginning, a new humanity, a new creation. And so this is probably why Psalm 98 appears in the lectionary during the Easter season. Because the resurrection of Jesus is itself kind of a lure on our feelings. It presents to us a possibility that there might be a new beginning for ourselves, that we might be part of a new creation for God. And just as God was victorious over the enemies of Israel in Psalm 98, in the resurrection, God defeats our enemies of sin and death. God's victory opens up the possibility that something wonderful and new might happen. Our feelings are stirred, and we respond. Well, as God moves towards us, presenting us with these lures for feeling, we have our response. Verse 4 of the psalm reads, "Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Break forth into joyous song and sing praises." Well, during the formations class, I was reminded of the story. I have to insert it here to share. When I was a teenager, I was often called upon by our director of missions to go preach in all the little rural churches in Ottawa and Delaware County. And one day, the director of missions calls me up and he says, "Scott, I want you to go preach at Pointer Baptist Church this Sunday." And I said, "Where in the world is Pointer Baptist Church?" I've never even heard of it. He said, "Well, do you know where Whitewater Baptist Church is?" Now, Whitewater Baptist Church was about as far back in the woods and hills as you neared Missouri and Arkansas as it was possible to get. I thought. I said, "Yeah, I know where that is." He said, "Well, you drive past it." I thought, where in the world is this church? I mean, this is as far removed from civilization as it gets in northeast Oklahoma. So I drive out there. Sure enough, it's deep in the woods as you could possibly go to this little church, Pointer Baptist Church. There were 8 people in the congregation. They were all related, of course. But the funny thing is, none of them actually lived there anymore. They were all descended from the people who put the church there, so they all would drive in to church every Sunday. And like the nursery, for example, was in the back of the church. The little baby and the nursery worker played the whole time. You know, the church was going on. Well, when it was time for the first hymn, the music director gets up to the pulpit. He turns to his side with the hymn here, and then sticks his finger in his ear. Now, I was curious as to why, but I didn't have to wait long to find out. That is that none of the people in the congregation could carry the tune, nor could the guy that was leading the music. And so he proceeded to lead the music this way through the entire service. Now, what I can tell you about that congregation is they sang louder than any congregation I have ever been in. It was a cacophony. My mother and I had to resist laughing. But what was also true is it was one of those rare moments of like pure worship. I mean, these people loved to sing. Not one of them could, but they loved to sing. And so I was prompted to remember that story. That making a joyful noise unto the Lord does not mean that you have to know how to sing.